We're picking up something's just not right with your mom. She's very disorientated when Marilyn drops her. She doesn't know where she is in the hospital any longer, and she's very confused. And we think that we're going to send her to the memory clinic in Grootskia for a test on dementia. My whole world changed. Dementia. And we knew nothing about it. And we were like, come to think of it, Mommy doesn't roast the potatoes like she does. The other day she ironed Alex's blazer on the wrong side. Yeah, okay. So we take her for the test and she's diagnosed with vascular dementia. And we weren't the wiser about what was happening in here with my mom, because she seemed the same person. Yes, she repeated ourselves, all our parents do that, but sure, the world changed. So here I was, pregnant with a 13-year-old and a mom who was probably 7 years old. Did some research and I went to the Red Cross and I did a home-based caregivers course. And I took my mom with me. I had the baby then in December the 21st, and me with the baby in the carry cot and my mom, we went to go sit in lectures. And then I did the course and I graduated. And I prayed. I said, Lord, I don't have money. I don't have money. Caregivers cost like 6,000 to 8,000 rand a month. And I put a message out on Facebook, if anyone would like to split the cost of a caregiver and bring their mom who has dementia to my home, then that would be fabulous. Didn't I get a response? From 2 people it went to 4 people, from 4 people it went to 6, and then 10, and then 15, and then I had to rent a house. Because it was going chaotic with this 13-year-old and this toddler and mommy, what's going on? And Ingrid, ons maak hier suiker nou hier en die mense maak hier tea en wat maak ons vir lunch? And oh, Juta's calling me, I've got to go to Joburg. And this was my life like for almost 2 years. From 2 of those daycare people, it went to 4 that stayed over with my mom, and then 10, and then all 12 were staying over.
Judges 7 from verse 9. That night, God told Gideon, get up and go to the camp. I've given it to you. If you have any doubts about going down, go down with Purah, your armor bearer, and when you hear what they're saying, you'll be bold and confident. He and his armor bearer Purah went down near the place where sentries were posted. Midian and Amalek, all the Easterners, were spread out on the plain like a swarm of locusts, and their camels, past counting, like grains of sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just in time to hear a man tell his friend a dream. He said, I had this dream. A loaf of barley bread tumbled into the Midianite camp. It came to the tent and hit it so hard it collapsed. The tent fell. His friend said, this has to be the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has turned Midian, the whole camp, over to him. When Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he dropped to his knees before God in prayer. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and said, get up and get going. God has just given us the Midianite army. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch in the jar. He said, watch me and watch what I do. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly what I do. When I and those with me blow the trumpets, you also all around the camp blow your trumpets and shout, for God and for Gideon. Gideon and his 100 men got to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the sentries had been posted. They blew the trumpets, at the same time smashing the jars they carried. All 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands, ready to blow, and shouted, a sword for God and for Gideon. They were stationed all around the camp. each man at his post. The whole Midianite camp jumped to its feet. They yelled and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, God aimed each Midianite sword against his companion all over the camp. They ran for their lives to Beth-Sittah, towards Zererah, to the border of Abel, Mahola, near Tabith.
Welcome to you, and we're glad that you are able to join us today. And I'm speaking about fear. I'm Jeff. I'm the minister of the People's Church. I've been in this church for 21 years now, work with a wonderful team. We're in Constantia in Cape Town, and if you ever are in our neighborhood, you'll receive a warm welcome if you come. We are known for being friendly and for being welcoming. The church is waiting for you, and we're expecting you to arrive. I'm speaking about fear today, a topic that I know about, because it's a topic that I experience. I experience fear. And we are living in a society, a community that is extremely stressed. People are saying this, and I think that it is probably true, that it's since the Second World War, 1939 to 45, there hasn't been a time when people have been more stressed than they are at the moment. I could list all the things that are adding to our stress. I wrote down some: the cost of living, poor administration, Eskom, fuel, war in Europe, health, petrol going to be 24 rand a litre, they say, in the next month. We think, how are we going to cope? Fear. But it's sufficient to say that our society is stressed. And 1 John chapter 4, not John, 1 John chapter 4 and verse 13, he says this: "Now we know that we live in him and he in us, because he has given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testify that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in him and he in God. And so we know and rely on the love that God has for us." I love that phrase. We rely on the love that God has for us, not on the love I have for God, but on the love that God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. In this way, love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment, because in this world we are like him. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment, consequences. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. I'll come back to that passage later. But the emphasis is on that perfect love drives out fear. I'm going to wander here and there speaking about fear, but I'm going to be going in a zigzag way towards a particular point at the end. Bear with me on my journey. And I'm going to end up at the fact that perfect love casts out fear. Fear, the Greek word phobos, phobia. It means flight or running away, the desire to run away from a situation. It is designed into our nature. It comes from the instinct of self-preservation. It is in and of itself not a bad thing. It is a good thing. When there's danger, it's good to make yourself scarce. It is frequently mentioned in the Bible. I went through, there are many, many books in the Bible, in the New Testament. Just every single book, all the Gospels, all speak about fear. Fear is a two-sided coin. It's not a bad thing in and of itself, but if it is allowed to dominate our life, it is unhealthy. So you can have healthy fear, but fear can, if you allow it, become an unhealthy factor in our life. Paul, I always think that Paul was a tough customer, but Paul feared. 1 Corinthians 2:3, "I came to you in weakness and fear and with much trembling, he said. He'd come to a church with strong personalities, and he had to deliver what he knew would be an unpopular message. And he said he was trembling and he was anxious about how it was going to go down. And it didn't go down well either. His fears were justified. To do the right thing sometimes brings fear. I have to do something, but it brings fear into my life. And so to experience fear doesn't mean that you are weak or that you are cowardly. Sometimes it means that you're doing the right thing. It's contrary to being weak and cowardly. Courage isn't the opposite of fear. Courage is to be afraid and to do what you need to do anyway. So courage and fear go together. It is fear that makes courage courage. So perhaps you have an upcoming hard conversation. You have got a conversation that you're not looking forward to. Or maybe you have a duty to perform. It plays on your mind and it provokes anxiety. The greatest heroes also felt such emotions. It is common to us all. It has to be managed in our lives. And so it might be that you have a difficult task. For a good number of years, if I say a good number of years, more than 5 or 6 years, maybe for 10 years of my life in the ministry, every single Saturday night, I would be anxious. So much so that every single Saturday night, I would have an upset stomach. It was so unnecessary, but it was just the way that it was. And it was my personality. I wish I'd learned to manage my fears better earlier in my life. And maybe you need to learn to manage your fears better as well. Because fear makes your life miserable. The Bible talks about fear and slavery. Those two words often appear side by side. It says in Romans chapter 8, verse 15, you have not received a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear. Fear enslaves you. Hebrews 2:15, free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear. And so fear can enslave you. A slave was owned by someone. A slave belonged to someone else. They had to do things that weren't in their hearts to do. They were abused and bullied, and they never had freedom of choice. That's what fear does to you. It changes it seems to reduce your options in life. You feel bullied and powerless and resentful. That's a horrible and tough place to be in the grip of fear, to be in a place of abuse. When you are fearful, you feel abused. This is deeply unhealthy. So an abused wife, she is being treated atrociously by her husband, but she doesn't leave. She stays in the situation. Why? Because somehow she's been enslaved by fear. And it takes a tremendous effort to break away from that. Very often a crisis causes, only a crisis will bring an enslaved person and cause them to free themselves. Or you have a bully boss. You feel the unfairness of it keenly, and it is unfair, but it is so hard to stand up to the abuser. So fear is a type of slavery. It is so debilitating. It sucks the very life out of us. God doesn't want us to have unhealthy fear in our life. Social media can make cowards of us all. I read in an article just this week that the Third World War of propaganda has already started. So we need to be aware that there's a propaganda war and a campaign that is being waged. We have to be sophisticated in our approach to media. And I'm not only speaking about newspapers and TV, I'm speaking about online media, because it comes and it ankle taps us. There are campaigns being waged to get you to think in a certain way. And the more you look at it, the more you'll get it. That's the way that the internet works. But there is nothing new under the sun. Leviticus 26, verse 36, describes people that are so fearful that they will run away even though there is no danger. You may be feeling fear that is totally unnecessary because you've been fed a narrative that brings about fear, but the narrative is a false narrative. You need to be aware that that is a possibility. It says, the sound of a rustling leaf will put them to flight. They will fear even though no one is chasing them. And so we can live in fear caused by propaganda. When you feed on social media, you will find yourselves getting more and more of the same. This leads you to think that this is what the world is really like. And this is reality, whereas it is not reality at all. What you feed on sets the tone of your life. This is important, and I want you to hear me. What you feed on sets the tone of your life. Silkworms, if you feed them mulberry leaves, the thread comes out a yellowy, golden color. But I've been told, I've never done it, but I've been told if you rear them from when they hatch on beetroot leaves, their fiber comes out a different color, a purple color. The color of their silk changes. Propaganda. In a time of war, the first casualty is truth. Goebbels, the Minister of Information and the great propaganda general for Adolf Hitler, said the more ridiculous the lie, the more people will believe it. And if you repeat it often enough, they will believe absolutely anything. There's a Bible example of psychological warfare. It's the story of Gideon. Laura read it for you. So God sent a dream, a bizarre dream, a bun, a bread roll, comes down a mountainside, and it wipes out a tent. The men were heard discussing the dream in the tent, and they said, this bread roll, they make a massive leap, is the sword of Gideon. Why were they making these leaps? Because they were afraid. The Midianites' nerves were stretched. If only they knew that they were tens of thousands and the people that surrounded them were 300. But they didn't know. Their imagination did everything that was necessary in order to make them flee. When those lamps blazed and the trumpets blew, they thought behind every trumpet, there's surely 10,000 men. We are doomed. And they fled. It was a case of psychological warfare right back in the Bible. When your nerves are stretched, you become vulnerable. Fear makes you vulnerable. We once went for a weekend, a long weekend, to somebody's house. It was at a place called Cosmos. Cosmos is on the banks of the Hardebeespoort Dam. Very pretty area. And the house that we had a jetty out into the water, but it had nowhere to launch the boat. And we'd come with our rubber duck. And so we went to the local boat club and said, can we launch the boat here? They said, you have to become a temporary member. The price of becoming a temporary member was too much for my Scottish ancestry to cope with. I said, no, we can't pay that. We can't become temporary members just to launch the boat once. And so I said to Wendy, I'll just drive up the road and I'll see a holiday house that has got a launchway and that is empty, where the people aren't at home, and I'll go and I'll launch there. And I went and I took the boat and I found such a house, and I launched. I went down, reversed the boat down the launchway. My nerves were a jangle. My nerves were stretched. I was just waiting for someone to open a window or a door and say, hey, what do you think you are doing? Get off, this is private property. You know, as I was undoing the boat, I stood up suddenly and I cut my head open on the boat motor, and I stumbled and I fell on the slime of the slipway, and I had all sorts of slime down the side of me, and my leg was lame. There was no one to chase me. And someone laughed at me and said, this is the proverb, the wicked flee when no one is chasing. And that was me at that time. That's what fear does to you. It makes you ineffective, ineffectual, and you are defeated when it is unnecessary to be defeated. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 8, he says, when you go to war, the officer should ask the men that have gone to war, is any man afraid or faint-hearted? If anyone says, I'm really afraid, then go home, because it'll be catchy. If you are afraid, you make the other people afraid as well. We'll be better off without you. And so such people would be sent home and would not be there to dishearten other people. Fear needs to be managed, and fear is managed by perspective. Let me read to you from Isaiah 51 and from verse 12. He says, even I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you fear mortal men? God says, why are you afraid of people? The sons of men who are but grass, that you forget the Lord your Maker? So you're afraid of people that are just like grass, and you forget about me, your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth, that you live in constant terror every day because of the wrath of the oppressor who is bent on destruction. For where is the wrath of the oppressor? The cowering prisoner will soon be set free. They will not die in their dungeon, nor will they lack bread. For I am the Lord your God, who churns up the sea, that its waves roar. The Lord Almighty is his name. Have perspective and know that God cares about you and God loves you. Don't be more afraid of people than so afraid of people that you lose sight of the one who is caring for you and who knows about you. You have to feed your faith, and you have to starve your fears. The problem is that we often do exactly the opposite. We feed our fears and we starve our faith. We should not have those conversations around the braai that leave us feeling defeated. We should not have those conversations at work where we just go from one story of disaster to another story of disaster. I'm not talking about being an ostrich. I'm talking about feeding your faith and not feeding your fears. Psalm 78, verse 9. The men of Ephraim turned back in the day of battle, even though they were armed with bows. They had no need to be defeated, but it was a needless defeat. We suffer needless defeat. We have what we need, but fear makes us act in a defeated way. There's a wonderful story in Malcolm Gladwell's book that is entitled David and Goliath, but it's not a religious book. It's a book about how small people can achieve great things. It's a wonderful book. And there he does a technical examination of the hitting power of the pebble from David's sling that took out Goliath. And he comes with all the science to show that the stone that came out of that sling, such as they used, that slingshot, had the power of a bullet from a Colt 45 Magnum handgun. So it was like shooting Goliath between the eyes and Goliath was so big, David couldn't miss. It was such a large target. You see, David had perspective. And it was also psychological warfare that was being waged on the Israelites. But David managed it with what he knew about God. And he knew that Goliath was too big to miss. If Christ is for us, who can be against us. Often it is people we are afraid of. Often it is people we are afraid of. This is the most dangerous type of fear. In John chapter 12, it says there were many who believed in Jesus, but they would not come out into the open because of the fear that they had of the Jews. And this was a powerful factor, and it was not going away quickly either. Peter ate freely with the Gentiles. You read about this in Galatians chapter 2. He ate freely with the Gentiles, but when the Jews from Jerusalem, who were insisting on circumcision, arrived, he started to withhold, and he would no longer eat with the Gentiles. Paul said, I stood up and I withstood him to his face and said, you are a hypocrite, because one day you were doing it this way, and now you're doing it another way, because you're scared of those people over there. And so fear of people breeds hypocrisy in our lives. Pilate, who washed his hands. The Gospels tell us that Pilate didn't condemn Jesus because he felt that Jesus was guilty, and nor did he condemn Jesus because he wanted to see Jesus crucified. He actually wanted to set Jesus free. But the fear that he had of the Jewish people caused him to hand him over to be crucified. Fear allows you to do terrible things that are against your very nature to do. Fear can turn you into a lesser person. Cowardice is what I'm describing. Fear is dangerous. So you can feel the fear, but don't be a coward. And so I want to end now with this passage that I read earlier on. On my desk I have some magnets. When I talk on the phone, I often find myself fiddling with the magnets. What is a magnet? I can't pull these magnets apart. They're so small. I can bend it, but they're so powerful, I can't pull them apart. That's how strong they are. What makes a magnet strong? Well, what makes a magnet strong is that it has been aligned. And so I can have this magnet, and I don't know if you can bring the camera. Can I show you like this? I just want to show. You can have a magnet, and now I've got a positive and against a positive, and I can't make those 2 points meet. I can't. I'm not faking it. I cannot press the one against the other. I'll brace my fingers like that and see if I can do it now. What is it that's causing that to happen? There's an invisible force. It's called a magnetic field. And so, in these magnets, they're fun. A magnet is a piece of magnetic or ferrous material where the electrons have been arranged in a certain way that they're pointing in a certain direction. Now it says in 1 John chapter 1, perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love casts out fear. And God is love. As we draw close to God, something happens inside of us. There is an invisible force that comes to work in our life, and we find that we start to orientate in a certain way. And when we orientate in a certain way, we become powerful in that certain way. And so a mother with a baby, that mother has been orientated towards that baby. And that mother will perform acts of courage and acts of strength that you would never naturally do. Why? Because her whole being is directed in one direction towards the protection and the care and the nurture of that little baby. That is the instinct that is inside of her. When we draw close to God, something happens in our inner world and we get aligned in a certain way. And we find that as God's love comes towards us, perfect love casts out fear. We find that our love for God changes our very nature, our being. It turns us from being cowards into being heroes. God has an effect on our life. Now, I say we come close to the love of God. I don't say we love God, because we can't love God. We can't love God because we are selfish beings and we are frail and fragile. But when we understand that God cares and loves us, and as we say, if He loves me, I can love Him back, and we turn our hearts towards Him and we're drawn towards Him, things start to align. The electrons in the spiritual electrons in our all start to point in the same direction, and we develop a magnetic force in our life, and we become something that we would not ordinarily be. Something changes inside of us. How do you bring yourself into the love of God? Just by showing up. The music you listen to, the company you keep, the thoughts that you think, the deeds that you do, all of those things draw you into the presence of God. You will find that some people drag you away from God, but you will find that some people draw you close to God. You will find that coming to church, it's so important for us to be in God's presence. Even as I'm speaking to you now, I trust that you are aware of God's presence where you're sitting, and God's love will come and change the way that you are. Perfect love casts out fear. And so this isn't a call to heroism, this is a call to loving God. And if you love God, you will find that the heroism will emerge, and you'll say, whoa, I didn't know I was capable of doing that. May God help you to manage your fears. I'm going to pray now for you. Just join me as I pray. Lord Jesus, I pray for every person that has been watching this or has been hearing my voice. I pray, Lord, that they would become, my one prayer for them is that they would become aware of your love for them. Become aware that you love them in an unqualified way. There's nothing they can do to make you love them more. And there's nothing they can do that'll cause you to slam the door on them. Lord, I pray that people will be aware of the love that God has for them. Amen.
Hi, thank you so much, Jeff, for that message. Perhaps today you have listened to that message and it grabbed you. You are someone who are almost struggling and enslaved by fear, but today you feel like you gotta do something that is not just in your mind, but is a solid action. Perhaps that action is to click a link underneath. There's a next steps card link where you can fill in the details and we'll pray for you. Perhaps that action is messaging us or sending us an email or whatever you do take an action, because that action can solidify whatever is happening inside of your heart right now. So God bless you guys. Right now, we will prepare ourselves to give our tithes and our offering. I want to say thank you to you for being a generous church. Your giving makes a difference to people inside the walls of the church and outside, beyond the walls of the church. So you'll hear stories of people being helped. You hear stories of families who are who've been struggling to put food on the table, and we're able to actually give something towards them. We are able to give out to the Ukraine people. Last week we were able to build something with the people in Zambia. We are able to do something with the kids and all kinds of stuff. It's because of your generous giving. So thank you, church, for your generous giving. All the giving details are on the screen, and God bless you as you give today.